Hey guys, welcome to AP US History with Lennox, and today we're talking about the second President of the United States, John Adams. Now we know John Adams from previous events that we've talked about on other videos, such as defending the soldiers from the Boston Massacre, or helping draft the Declaration of Independence with Thomas Jefferson, or being part of the Second Continental Congress that actually voted to break away from Great Britain. And finally, he was the Vice President under George Washington. So he's been around for a while and he knows this country. So it just made sense that he would be the man to follow Washington as president. Now, coming into office, remember, Washington had given us quite a bit of advice in his farewell address. He basically said, stay away from political parties. Also, avoid sectionalism in our country. We're one nation, not a whole bunch of little ones. Stay away from foreign entanglements. We don't need that kind of drama. And above all, respect the U.S. Constitution. Well, if we use Washington's warnings as a litmus test, let's see how the Adams administration did. Not so good. There was a ton of political partisanship during his administration, both in his cabinet and in Congress as well. Sectionalism was in our country from the beginning. It's in our country today. And even though Washington can warn us about it, it's not going to go away. Drama from foreign entanglements is all Adams has. In fact, foreign policy is probably the backbone of the Adams administration. And he is going to be accused of violating terms of the Constitution. And we're going to get to all of that. The election of 1796 is going to put John Adams up against Thomas Jefferson. John Adams, a Federalist, is going to support the idea that our economy is best based on a manufacturing ideal. He also believed that we should stay out of any involvement in the French War. We know Thomas Jefferson absolutely supported the French, and he said, no, our economy should be based on agrarian or agriculture because that will be the future of our country. Now, when you look at our country, we're going to vote right along sectional lines with those two big ideas of manufacturing versus agriculture. The Northeast, the center of manufacturing in the United States, is going to support Adams and the Federalists. The South and West, the center of agriculture, is going to support Jefferson and the Republicans. In this case, you'll see that Adams is going to win by a hair and take the presidency. Now, sectionalism still is around today. Here's a map from the presidential election of 2000 as well as 2004. You can even jump to 2008, and you really don't see a big difference. Sectionalism basically existed in our country in the beginning, still exists today. Yes, there's going to be little waves here and there, but for the most part, you're going to see voting blocks for different political parties line up in every single election. Our Constitution has no provisions for political parties, and you can see that in the way that the president and vice president were decided during this time. I'll get to that in just a minute. But just because there's no provision about political parties or political factions doesn't mean the idea hadn't been discussed. In fact, in Federalist 10, James Madison is going to address it, basically saying that a number of citizens, either if they're in the minority or the majority, are going to be united by a passion or interest. And that passion or interest is probably going to be opposite of the other group. There's all these different passions throughout our country, and you tend to migrate towards those who share similar passions and ideas. He said the only way we can deal with political parties in our country, there's two ways. Number one, we can create a utopian society where everybody agrees. That ain't happening. Or, number two, let's just take away the freedom of choice. Just have one political party and don't give the American citizens the choice. But then why have a democracy in the first place? So what Madison is basically saying is we have two options. Neither one is going to work. Political parties are here to stay. Well, the results, like I said, Adams wins by a hair, but the way the Constitution was drafted at the time of this election was whoever came in first got the presidency, and whoever came in second was the vice president. So we have a Federalist as the president and a Democratic Republican as a vice president. Can you imagine if that was the situation in today's political world? Oh gosh, I can't even imagine. But fortunately, the 12th Amendment is going to be passed in the early 1800s, which is going to put the vice president on a separate ballot from the president. Thereby, you'll always have the number one and number two guy in the country be of the same party. But partisanship didn't just occur in politics, it was in the news as well. I know this may sound shocking to you, but our media is biased. And it always has been. We talk about the different news stations today, the Fox, the CNN, the MSNBC, the C-SPAN, all of those. Partisan, we know it. No different in the 1790s, except they didn't have television, they had newspapers. An example, the Gazette of the United States typically reported on behalf of the Federalists, whereas the National Gazette typically favored the Republicans, which kind of makes sense since Jefferson published the Gazette, but okay. And they would attack one another. The National Gazette, this is how they referred to Adams during the presidency. He's crippled, he's toothless, he's old and bald. What kind of president can he be? So there's nothing new in the world today. We just do it a little differently. There was even fights within Congress. Now, fortunately, we haven't seen anything like this recently, but in 1798, you had the Griswold-Lyon fight. Griswold was a Federalist, Lyon a Republican. And Griswold was upset, first of all, because apparently Lyon spit tobacco, on the congressional floor, and it almost hit Griswold, and he called it a gross indecency and thought that Lyon should be expelled from the Congress, which it is kind of gross, but I don't know if I'd expel him from Congress. Well, the House said, no, we're not going to do that. Griswold's still not too happy about it. So when Lyon was speaking 2 weeks later and talking about how I am the purveyor and the defender of the common man, Griswold took a shot at him. Lyon had a reputation for cowardice during the American Revolution. He really didn't have a very good military record. So what Griswold said when Lyon said, I am the defender of the common man, Griswold said, what are you going to defend him with? That wooden stick you tried to use in the American Revolution? Well, apparently that was some major insult, and the two are going to take to fighting. Griswold's going to grab some fire tongs and start swinging away at Lyon, and, Lyon's going to use a wooden stick. So maybe Griswold was onto something with that, fighting with a wooden stick. Bottom line, they're going to be broken up, and both men are going to be kicked out of Congress for their behavior. But the whole purpose of this is not to talk about the fight, which is kind of fun, but more talk about the level of partisanship that existed just a couple years, or not even a couple years, just within the year of Washington leaving and giving that farewell address. So we had two political parties in our country in the 1790s, and I want to break down the primary differences between the two. The leaders, you had Hamilton and Adams under the Federalists, Jefferson and James Madison under the Republicans. And what you're going to see on both sides of these is how they view the importance of the federal government. One side is going to view the federal government as central and important to the survival of our country. The other one is going to see it as a threat to the survival of our country. Under the idea of federalism, that is the division of power between state and federal governments. The Federalists believed that you should have a strong central government. And on the opposite side, the Republicans believe you should have states' rights or strong state governments. The biggest fear that the Federalists had was mob rule or anarchy, meaning that they believed if you gave the people way too much power, then they would just overthrow the government and anarchists would prevail. Whereas the Republicans say we are more fearful of a big central government which could lead to tyranny. They both valued the Constitution. However, the Federalists believed it should be interpreted loosely, and the Republicans believed it should be interpreted very strict. With regards to government involvement in different parts of life within the economy, the Federalists believed absolutely the government should be involved in the economy and help balance the economy. I mean, look, it was Hamilton who came up with that financial plan in Washington's administration to try to get us out of debt. And who was most opposed to it? Well, it was Jefferson. Republicans didn't believe that the government should be involved in the economy whatsoever. Just let things happen as they will. Well, if you know anything about Hamilton's financial plan, you know the national bank was centered to it, so the Federalists absolutely supported it. And the Republicans said, no, we hate it. Protective tariffs are going to be put in place to prop up manufacturing, meaning that they were going to put taxes on imports coming into our country, and that's going to help manufacturers in our country. So the Federalists supported it. The Republicans were against it because those same tariffs that are being implemented in America are being implemented on goods that we're shipping to other countries, meaning other countries are taxing us too. And agrarian states, specifically in the South, relied on exporting their goods to Europe, and now they're having to pay a tax over there. So while it's helping manufacturers here, it's hurting farmers over in Europe. The assumption of the state war debts, we know that the Federalists supported that, and we know that the Republicans hated it. When you look at the people who supported the Federalists, primarily the urban centers, people who lived in cities, whereas, no surprise, it's going to be the rural areas, the farmers, those who own land in the South and the West that support the Republicans. And with regards to foreign policy, when we talk foreign policy in the 1790s, what we're talking about is our relationship with France. Bottom line. And if you remember correctly, France is at war with all of Europe. The Federalists wanted to take Washington's advice, stay completely out of it. In fact, they leaned more towards supporting England. That's called Anglophiles. They supported England. Whereas the Republicans are Francophiles. They are going to support France. All right? So that's kind of what the field of play looks like as Adams takes the presidency. I mentioned to you that the predominant makeup of his presidency is going to be foreign policy, and a lot of that has to do with the war going on in France. We're having trouble with the French basically interfering with our shipping and our trade. And so Adams is going to send representatives to negotiate some form of peace when, over in France. It's known as the XYZ Affair. It's not going to go as Adams sees. Let me show you a quick video clip about the XYZ Affair.
Angry at U.S. neutrality in the British-French conflict, the French had attacked a number of American ships. It was a big problem for President John Adams. The French keep attacking American ships. What shall I do? I must send smart diplomats to negotiate with French Foreign Minister Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Perigord. We are three smart diplomats. We want to negotiate. Please send us to France. My dream has come true. Surely Charles Pinckney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry will successfully negotiate. Well, what are you waiting for? Get to work. Consider God, Mr. President. This is cool. Dude, we're like diplomats. Here come the foreign minister's representatives. Let us report to them as X, Y, and Z. So you want us to leave your ships alone? Yes, we do. How much? I'd say pretty much. Enough to offer us a ride. Give us hell. France is a powerful country. You better pay. We'd rather fight an expensive war than pay you some stupid crime. We say millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. You'll be sorry. When Americans got word of how disrespectfully they'd been treated by the French, many wanted to go to war. George Washington was ready to come out of retirement to lead the army. Adams, however, tried further negotiation, and this time, France treated America seriously.
The XYZ Affair, so named because that's how Americans referred to the French representatives who demanded a bribe, showed the world that the United States demanded to be treated with respect.
So that didn't go very well, and what this is going to lead to is what's known as the Quasi War, which was a naval war between the United States and France. Now, we never declared war, so it's an undeclared war, which is why we call it quasi. But make no mistake about it, we were at war with France from 1798 to 1800. During this time, Adams is trying to protect Americans from French influence, from spies, if you will. And so Congress is going to pass the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, the Alien Acts included the Naturalization Act, the Alien Friends Act, and the Alien Enemies Act. And they basically said this. Number one, the United States president has the authority to deport any undesirable aliens. I want you to think back to the Washington administration and Citizen Genet and how he came in and tried to stir the pot with the Americans, trying to get them to go against Washington and his government to support the French. That's the reasoning behind this. They also extended residency requirements. So now if you're coming into America, you have to live here for 14 years before you can become a citizen. The idea was this would stop French nationals from trying to infiltrate citizenship in our country. So is this constitutional? Is what Adams and the Congress did with the Alien Acts constitutional? And the simple answer is absolutely. Article 1, Section 8 says Congress has the authority to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Congress has the power to make laws about immigration. That's a delegated power given to them by the Constitution. But the other side of that, the Sedition Acts, a little bit different. Congress passes the Sedition Act, which Adams signed, that said that it was illegal to publish false, scandalous, and malicious writings about our government. How does that sound? They put an expiration date. They said it's not forever. We're going to pull it. It's going to become null and void on March 4th, 1801. Now, for those of you who are not presidential scholars, let me just tell you what's so significant about that date. That's Inauguration Day. So that's when the next president will be taking office. Now, Adams is only in his first term, so I think the expiration date is kind of interesting because I think he's almost saying, I don't think I'm going to get reelected. So I'm just going to keep this Sedition Act in place until the next guy comes in. A lot of people saw that as him trying to protect his own reputation. Is this constitutional? Hopefully, you're sitting there shaking your head violently saying, no, it's not. First Amendment, Congress can make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of press. Where's the respect for the Constitution that Washington told us we should hold? So what about all this? What's going on while all this is happening? Do you really think Americans are just standing by and saying, I guess we can't write anything bad about the president? The big answer is no. Two of the predominant Americans at this time, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, are going to draft the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And in these resolutions, they are going to address how they feel that the government is using their power as the Federalists to kind of push an agenda. That's what Madison warned against in Federalist 10, was that a faction could be detrimental to our union. So in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, both Jefferson and Madison are going to write that the U.S. government, number one, is acting beyond the bounds of the Constitution. Jefferson will draft the Kentucky resolution. Madison will draft the Virginia resolution. And these are basically protest resolutions that will be passed by the state legislatures of Virginia and Kentucky. And what they're going to argue is that the U.S. Constitution is actually an agreement or a compact between the states. And because it's an agreement between the states and not between the states and a federal government, because there was no federal government that signed off on the Constitution, all the states did. Because of that, the states have the authority to interpret the Constitution. Now, keep in mind, in today's world, we always look to the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, to interpret the Constitution. Even though we had a judicial branch at this point, no one had really established exactly what its role was, and no one had absolutely established who had the power to interpret the Constitution. So what Jefferson and Madison are saying is, hey, the states are the ones who signed this agreement, and since the states signed it, it must be the states who have the responsibility to interpret it. So, how far can the states go in this interpretation? What is their power at this point? Well, first of all, both Jefferson and Madison said the states do have the authority of interposition, meaning they have the authority to interpose or get involved in this discussion to determine whether or not something is constitutional. Beyond that, though, Jefferson is going to take it a step further. He is going to say, should a state determine that something in the Constitution or passed by Congress is unconstitutional, states have the power to nullify it, basically cancel it or ignore it like it doesn't exist. Madison really wasn't ready to go that far, but nullification, this theory of nullification, is very important that you understand because you're going to hear it over and over again as we move through history, where states are threatening to nullify various laws that our government has passed. And it can all be traced back to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Okay? All right. The resolutions, the Sedition Act, the Quasi War, all of this is going to mount up to a very difficult re-election campaign for John Adams. And Thomas Jefferson will win the election of 1800. It's known as the Revolution of 1800 because for the first time in American history, really the first time in world history, power has been shifted from one political ideology to another, and control of a country has been shifted from one ideology to another without a single shot being fired. It was a peaceful transition of power, and we were transitioning from a Federalist-controlled government to a Republican-controlled government. And it wasn't just in the presidency, it was also in Congress as well. This is huge. This is the first time that we see that our system really works. Yeah, I mean, when Adams got elected, he was a Federalist, and quite honestly, though Washington argued against political parties, he was a Federalist too. But now we have a whole new group of leaders coming in and are going to lead based on what they think is best for our country. And again, not one shot was fired. That's the greatness of our country, is that we do have these elections, and every 4 years we elect a new leader. And there's always that peaceful transition of power. Sets us apart from many other countries in the world. Well, that's it. That's the Adams administration. Hopefully you learned something. I appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.